Hello pandas and other scrap enthusiasts, and welcome back to the shop. On today's episode, I have a question. See, by now we're probably all familiar with large copper-wound electric motors and how it is totally worth taking the time to separate the clean copper from the rest of it to get the higher price for that copper scrap. But what about on smaller motors? Like this one, which came out of a vacuum cleaner, or possibly this one, which came out of a large fan, or possibly this one, out of a smaller fan. If you've spent any time collecting scrap metal, you've definitely run into a few motors that just did not seem worth spending the time opening up, and you're likely going to end up with a bin like this full of motors that just didn't really appeal to you. But where is the line? That's what I want to find out today. So I've separated all of my smaller motors and saved them up just for this special episode. My power cord for my scale is broken, so I'm going to solder that back together. So for now, I'm going to go through all of these. I'm going to separate the material, keep the copper in one and the everything else in another, and then weigh up the difference and find out just how much we made per hour by spending the time versus just bringing them all in and selling them just like this. So, let's get started.
Quite the collection we've got here. Many different types, and I think that's kind of... See, there's a lot of these ones that only have two different loops. And then this one, we'll get back to these style, trust me, those are a bit of a feature. And that's kind of the thing with all of these small ones. It's a bit of an adventure because there's so many different styles. Here's one now. This one's similar to the motor you'll find in the bottom of a microwave, although this one it was a little bit more annoying, so we had to get the power tools eventually. And it makes a good example of what I think the key lesson is in all of this, but we'll get back to that. Now this one, well, taking that apart is fun and easy. Sort of. It ended up being more complicated than I actually expected, but that'll be a bit of a running theme. As we go through, there's many different ways to take all of these things apart, and the angle grinder became pretty important. And when the angle grinder is important, the bench vise is important. They're closely related in that respect. Now the angle grinder could be used here as well, but I found with these smaller ones, the bolts and screws are a simple job for the drill. At least most of the time. This one, well again, that's sort of the theme. Every single one of these is its own little adventure, but I think that's kind of where the fun comes from. Now this one's another example of that different style. I'm not crazy about these. All of the copper is on the inside, the stator part. But whether it ends up being profitable or not, this was a fun little side quest and a great excuse to just stay home while it is brutally cold outside. Yeah, our cold snap hit this week, so I opted to do this instead of going out treasure hunting. There's a little bit of back and forth between different techniques, but that's why it's an adventure. This one had an interesting feeling. It's kind of like that microwave motor, except yeah, we needed to cut down the side to get it open. Except it's got two of those inner winding hoop things. Learning all the time.
And after about an hour, we've got the pile cleaned up, along with a bucket of random junk that we'll have to pick through for pieces of aluminum to scavenge out. It's gotten pretty cold in here, so I decided to light the fire, and that should help keep the minus 19 degrees out the door, at least a little bit. Still gotta wear the marshmallow suit. So, now, the second half, removing all of the copper, and then we find out how much we actually made. Hopefully this will take less than an hour. So let's start the clock and then find out once and for all if these little guys are worth it.
So then, we're going to be cutting copper, and if we're doing that, I want to use this diamond tip blade. It's not that it necessarily does a better job, it does a really good job, but more importantly, it doesn't get any smaller as you use it, so it makes it a lot more consistent, and that saves time. Now, I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but these style of motors, even though they're smaller than the ones I usually focus on, being just these two windings, they come apart a lot faster. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're trying to decide if scrapping a certain thing is worth it. Now, speaking of which, we arrive at our first of this style. This is time-consuming, it doesn't have a whole lot of copper in it, and no matter which way you do it, it kind of makes a mess. But with that said, I was able to pull all the copper out. Now, moving on to an internet favorite technique, I think this should work pretty good for these smaller pieces, and I want to practice with this one here. I'm not a fan of these style because they're just such a pain to do with the angle grinder, but maybe the ye old machete. Okay, it would have helped having a steel plate underneath, but the real problem here is it was really bouncy, and it would rather transfer the kinetic energy into squashing itself rather than actually getting split open. So there's a challenge I wasn't expecting from this. And I think that's the advantage of having access to various tools and techniques rather than just one way to do it, because some of these didn't work very good with machete, and yet others, it was the perfect tool for the job. And then here's another slightly different version of that style of winding. The machete worked a dream. Look how good that is. Bright, clean copper just falling out. When it works, it absolutely works. So I decided to try it on one of these stator-only wound situations. And I think the key takeaway from my experience here was this was very time-consuming. You can't go all the way through because there's a thick steel rod that is fused inside there that you're not going to get through. So I had to hammer the machete from one side and then the other side and then another, and I ended up wasting a half an hour on this stupid thing. So we'll talk about that more later. Let's just move on. I know I was happy to. So the thing to really watch out for, as I learned last time I was practicing this, is not to try it on things that have steel pins running through to hold all the plates together. But this style, this just has two welds, two welded seams running down the side, and it worked great. It just split those right apart. And then even a larger one like this works amazing. Oh, and these ones were just fun. Big old spool of copper hair, and real easy to get out. I liked that. And then some of them, yeah, the machete wasn't it, so I went back to the angle grinder. Including this stupid thing, which I just had to give one more go. And, It was very time consuming. It was a little bit of copper and a whole lot of time. And then last but not least, we've got the hammer drill. set to demo hammer mode. Unfortunately, the camera wasn't very well centered, so I didn't get a lot of shots, but you've probably seen me use this a lot by now.
And after a grand total of 2.5 hours, we've got a beautiful bin of copper windings. But what about the payoff? How do we do? Let's add it all up, huh? And let's just use pounds this time because the units are not going to affect the final total per hour. So starting with the trash, just the various plastic bits, that was 2.4 pounds. And then we've got the stators and other bits. We'll still get the motor price for these, so 3.3 pounds there. And then some dirty aluminum, 3.8 pounds of dirty aluminum. And then the steel. Naturally, most of the weight is steel. We've got quite a bit of this stuff. 2 buckets, in fact. So we've got 60 point something, and minus this little thing, we got 58 pounds of steel. And the final bin, what it was all for, the copper windings, a beautiful total of 11.4 pounds. It doesn't sound like much, but that's where all our money was. And I added it all up at current market rates that I get here. Keep in mind, these numbers are in Canadian, but that's like $4 a pound for copper and 10 cents a pound for steel. That's a grand total of $53.92 for all of that sold in its current form. Keep in mind, that's not what we made, because if we just sold it as motors, it would have been 26.7 total pounds in all of that, and we would have gotten $13.35. I only get 50 cents a pound for motors, but so $53.92 minus $13.35, $40.57. Divided by 2.5 hours, we made $16.22 an hour, which honestly was surprising to me. That's not bad, and I'm not structuring this in a way to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do, because I don't know what your time is worth, but $16.22, that's how much it ended up being worth. Again, I was hoping it was going to be much less than that, and I could just go, small motors, pff, who needs them? But they're actually kind of worth doing, but with a couple caveats. See, this style here, the one that is basically a just a big old stator with 2 large magnets on the outside, you remember that one. I struggled with that for, honestly, like 30 minutes, and it didn't matter whether I was using the machete method or the slicing it out method. They are both a big pain in the butt. So 30 minutes for one of those out of a total of 2.5 hours of work. You see where I'm going with this. That brings the total way down. You'd be making more than $16 an hour if you just threw these into the sell as is bin as soon as you identified them. And I think everybody should have a sell as is bin. Likely you will, because you're going to have little guys like these, and I didn't bother taking any of these apart because that's some seriously fiddly work, and those are not going to be worth it. You can't change my mind. Not to me. Furthermore, these are also a big pain in the butt, and it's not that they don't have a significant amount of copper on them. The amount of time they take, I'm not going to be doing any of those. So I'm going to keep a sell as is motor pile, and well, I guess I'm going to keep adding the smaller ones to the to be scrapped pile. Oh well, still worth it. Now, big motors end up being close to $50 an hour, but the most important thing is being efficient. And it turns out the machete method is an important part to getting through motors as quickly as possible. Just need to identify which ones it's appropriate for and which ones it's not. These sorts of things, actually, machete method right there, but they always seem to flatten out for me. That's the video. Hope you enjoyed, and if you found this helpful or useful, or just want to support the channel, like, comment, subscribe for more scrap content, and I'll see you on the next one. Leave it better than you found it. Keep doing the thing.